Montana Territory, 1883. The wind carried the scent of pine and old snow through the Bitterroot Mountains, but all Harlan Price could smell was the smoke coming from the doctor's cabin. He tied off his horse and stepped down, boots crunching over frost-bitten grass. "You said she was too sick to travel," he said, jaw tight. "But I am not leaving without her." Dr. Emmett barely looked up from the steaming poultice he was mixing. "Then you best start building a wagon." Inside, the woman lay half buried in quilts, skin pale, lips chapped. The girl he used to know had vanished somewhere between the fever and the years. But even now, after everything, after the war, after his brother died, after he lost the ranch, Harlan knew her. "Violet," he said gently, stepping into the dim light of the room. "It's me." Her eyes opened slow, blue, tired, but still hers. "Harlan," her voice cracked. "You came. I told you I would." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. The cough took her hard, shaking her whole frame. Dr. Emmett came in behind him. "She's got what the old folks call lung fever. Another week here might kill her. A trip through the mountains might do the same. You want her to make it to Calistoga. You better keep her wrapped, fed, and off a saddle. I will not leave her here to die." Dr. Emmett crossed his arms. "Then build her a wagon." Harlan did not sleep that night. He rode into Darby before the sun came up, bartered his saddle horse for a mule, and started hauling lumber from the old sawmill. He worked with his coat off in the cold, shirt soaked in sweat, hands blistering. He tore apart an old freight wagon and rebuilt it from the axle up, low to the ground, with a canvas top and thick straw bedding. He used sheepskins from the trading post to line it, built a stove box in the back corner, and rigged a spring system to soften the ride. It took him 4 days. By the end of it, his knuckles were raw and his back locked up every time he stood. But the wagon stood steady, and it was ready. He came to get her the next morning. Violet sat propped against the pillows, her face thin but her eyes clearer than before. "You really built it," she whispered. "I told you I would." She looked at it from the window. "You think it'll hold me?" "It will hold you," he said, "and I will get you to Calistoga." She laughed, soft and broken. "You always were too stubborn." He smiled for the first time in days. "And you always were worth it." The doctor helped bundle her in layers: wool, furs, blankets. Harlan lifted her himself, cradling her like something precious, like something already his. He laid her in the wagon and covered her with quilts. "Thank you," she whispered as he tucked the last sheepskin around her. He paused. "You do not have to thank me, Violet." She blinked up at him, something unspoken in her gaze. But her eyes fluttered shut, and the moment passed. They left just before noon. Harlan drove the wagon himself, mule reins in his calloused hands. The trail was narrow and cold, but the sun peeked through the trees now and then. Violet slept most of the day, but when she woke, she watched him. He kept the firebox lit at night. He cooked her broth and made her drink water even when she did not want it. He read her old letters she had forgotten she gave him once, back before everything went wrong. "You kept these?" she asked one night, voice raspy. "I kept everything." She looked away, blinking fast. "I was supposed to marry someone else." "You never did." "No," she said, "because I was waiting on someone who never came home." He reached out, touched her hand gently. "I came home too late. But I am here now." She looked back at him, eyes wet. "You are." That night, he slept beside the wagon, wrapped in his coat. He never let the fire die. The days passed slow, but she stayed alive. Her color came back little by little. She started eating more, smiling sometimes when he said something stupid. She even teased him once about his lopsided beard. Each day, they moved farther south, out of the mountains. The air grew warmer. She sat up more. The cough did not shake her as hard. One evening, as the sun went down over the hills near Salmon, she reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the wagon board. "You built me a wagon," she said, voice quiet. He looked at her, heart thudding. "I would have built you a house if I thought it would save you." She smiled, really smiled for the first time in weeks. "You already did." They sat there a long moment. Her fingers curled around his. She did not let go. Neither did he. By the time they reached the plains of southern Idaho, she was sitting up at the front of the wagon with him, wrapped in blankets and sunlight, her head resting against his shoulder as he drove. "You still want to go all the way to Calistoga?" he asked one morning. She looked up at him, eyes soft. "I only wanted to go there because I thought it might save me." And now, she leaned her head against him again. Now I think I might already be saved. He swallowed hard, voice low. You saved me first. They rode on in silence, but their hands stayed linked between them, fingers laced tight. The wind across the Snake River carried the scent of thawing sage and wet stone, and Harlan watched it move in slow ripples through the brush. The wheels of the wagon cut fresh lines through mud softened by spring melt, the mule plodding steady under the shifting sky. Violet sat beside him, her hands tucked beneath a wool shawl, her eyes following the ridgeline, as if it might give her something she'd once forgotten. You ever think about the ranch? She asked, not looking at him. He shifted the reins in his hands. Some days, mostly at night. I used to picture it still standing, she said. Didn't know the house burned. He nodded once. Lightning took the barn first. House caught a day later. I was in Miles City buying seed. By the time I got back, it was cinders. She was quiet a moment. What did you do after? Tried to rebuild. But I buried my brother that same week. After that, I didn't see much point in fences. Her hand found the edge of the seat, fingers curling over the wood. I didn't know he was gone. I didn't write, he said. Didn't know how to say it. Violet swallowed. He was always kind to me. Always made me laugh. He thought the world of you, Harlan said. Said if I didn't marry you, he'd do it himself just to keep you close. That pulled a breath from her that might have been laughter. He said that. Said it more than once. The mule stepped around a patch of slick gravel, and the wagon rocked gently. Violet leaned into it without wincing, the first sign her ribs had begun to heal. I never married, she said after a while. There were offers. One man ran a store in Sandpoint. Another taught school. Both decent in their own way. You didn't want them? I didn't want to settle for something that had rot in my hands. Harlan turned toward her. And what would have lasted? She looked at him then, her gaze steady. Something that came for me when I couldn't come for myself. They camped that night in a small hollow below a sandstone bluff. Harlan gathered dry grass for the mule and cut kindling while Violet arranged their bedding inside the wagon. Her movements were slower than his, but no longer weak. He heard her humming once a threadbare tune from years ago, something about a June apple and a red ribbon. After supper, she sat near the fire, a blanket across her lap, her face lit by the low golden light. You remember that creek behind the barn? She asked. The one with the flat stones. I remember. I used to go out early and watch the minnows. Thought if I kept still long enough, I'd see something sacred. He poked at the fire with a stick. Did you? No, she said, then smiled faintly. But I liked the waiting. They watched the flames settle into coals. The sky turned violet, stars beginning to blink through the haze. I didn't expect to survive, she said, voice softer now. Not after the second fever. I made peace with it. He didn't look at her. I didn't. I know. He stood and added a log to the fire. The sparks rose and vanished. You could have left me there, she said. Would have been easier. I don't believe in easy, he said. She stood slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. I used to dream of this, she said. Not the wagon. Not the road. Just you and me and firelight. He turned, his voice low. What kept you from finding me? I thought you were lost, she said. Or done with me. I never was. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his sleeve. Then why'd you disappear? I thought you deserved more than a man dragging grief behind him like a plow. I didn't want more, she said. I just wanted you. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers curled into his, warm and certain. They stood like that a long time. The only sound the slow crackle of burning wood and the distant cry of a night bird. When she leaned her head against his chest, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, careful but sure. No words passed between them after that. They didn't need any. The silence said what years of distance never could. By morning, the frost had lifted from the grass. The mule waited patiently, and the wagon stood quiet beneath the wide Montana sky, ready to carry them wherever they chose to go. The land had begun to open in quiet ways, no longer the steep climbs and narrow passes, but wide stretches of ochre grass and scattered stands of cottonwood, their bare limbs reaching into early spring skies. The wagon creaked softly with every rut in the earth. Harlan didn't mind the silence between them. It had shifted into something companionable, like an old song hummed under breath. Violet leaned her elbow on the wagon's edge, face turned into the breeze. Her color had deepened since they'd left the mountains, and she no longer clutched the blankets to her chest, as if to keep her soul from slipping out. "Do you remember the Menkins girl?" she asked suddenly. "Came west with that preacher's family, settled near Lost Horse Creek." Harlan's brow creased. "The one with the lopsided braid? She married a wheelwright from Bozeman. Had 7 children. I saw her once at a harvest fair. She said she felt like she'd blinked and a decade passed." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "That's how it goes, I guess. You look up and everything's changed but the sky." Violet ran her fingers along the wagon's edge, drawing faint lines in the dust. "It's strange to think how many lives we might have had if things had turned different." "You'd have hated being a preacher's wife," Harlan said. She laughed under her breath. "I'd have set fire to the parlor out of boredom." They passed a half-collapsed line shack near a dried creek bed. A rusted stovepipe still clung to its side like a stubborn reminder. A crow watched them from the roof, feathers ruffled in the wind. "I used to think I'd grow old in one place," she said. "Plant lilacs. Learn to quilt. Maybe teach some neighbor girl how to read." "You still could," he said, low and steady. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Would you stay in one place long enough for lilacs?" He didn't answer right away. The mule flinched at a gust, and he calmed it with a quiet click. Then he said, "If you were there, I would." They made camp that night near a shallow wash, where low willows bent toward the water's edge. Harlan dug a shallow trench for the fire and ringed it with stones. Violet gathered dry twigs, her steps still careful but no longer hesitant. As dusk settled, she cooked a mash of barley and dried venison over the fire while he checked the wagon's axles. When he returned, she handed him a tin cup filled with food. "You always hated venison," he said, settling beside her. "I hated the way your brother overcooked it," she said. "This is better." He tilted his head. "You saying I'm a better cook than him?" "I'm saying I still have teeth after eating yours." He gave a quiet laugh, then grew thoughtful. "You always kept your own mind, even when folks didn't like it." "They said I was unladylike," she said. "Too sharp-tongued. Too wild." "You were never wild," he said. "You just weren't willing to shrink." She stirred the coals with a stick. "My mother wanted me to marry a man with land, one with a church coat and a sober nature. Instead, you chose a man with a busted wagon and a bad back," he said. She looked at him, her voice soft. "I didn't choose yet." He met her gaze, the fire throwing soft light across her face. "Then let me give you something to choose." She didn't speak, but she didn't look away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box, no bigger than his palm. The lid was carved with an old cattle brand, smoothed down by years of handling. "I made this before the fire," he said. "Meant to give it to you before I left for Helena. Found it again last winter, buried in what was left of the tack room." She opened it slowly. Inside, nestled on a square of blue cloth, was a ring made from braided horsehair and silver wire, simple, but made with care. "You carried it all this time?" she asked. "I didn't have much else worth keeping." Violet closed the lid gently. "You didn't ask me anything." "I didn't want to press you," he said. "Not while you were still getting your breath back." She set the box in her lap and looked toward the darkening horizon. "I don't want to be someone's obligation, Harlan. I've had enough of being looked after out of pity or duty." "That's not what this is," he said. "I want to build something with you. Not out of guilt. Not because you're sick. Because you're the one I've been walking towards since before I knew it." The wind tugged at her hair, loose now from its braid. She didn't speak right away. Then, without looking at him, she said, "I'll wear it when we cross into Oregon. If you still want me then." "I will," he said. She nodded once, then leaned her shoulder against his. They sat that way until the fire burned low and the stars came out one by one, no longer distant, but close enough to count. 3 days out from the Snake, the land turned gold underfoot, dry bunch grass rolling wide toward the blue mountains. The soil cracked, but yielding with the thaw. Sage hens kicked up dust where they passed, and the sun hung longer in the sky, as if reluctant to set too soon on the quiet between them. Violet had begun to rise early, not from fever or restlessness, but from the simple want of morning air. She'd sit on the wagon tongue, boots laced now, her coat patched at the elbow. Harlan would bring her coffee, and she'd drink it slow, watching the way his shoulders moved as he broke camp. One morning, she said, "I don't like that you sleep outside while I've got all the blankets." He didn't look up from where he was folding the canvas tarp. You're the one needs warming. I'm not made of glass, Harlan. No, he said. You're made of grit and stubbornness and something the wind can't wear down. She held his gaze, then gave a slow, measured nod. Still, tonight, we share the wagon. He didn't argue, just tipped his hat slightly and went back to packing, but his hands moved slower than before. By mid-afternoon, the trail sloped gently upward through pine-shadowed gullies. They passed a fur trapper's lean-to, long abandoned, the roof collapsed inward and moss climbing the logs. Violet stared at it as they rode by. My uncle used to live like that, she said. Off the river near Lewiston. Claimed the animals spoke to him if he sat still long enough. Did they? He said the elk told him when his wife was dying. Harlan adjusted the reins, the mule chewing the bit as it trudged forward. Did you believe him? I think grief makes people listen harder to things no one else hears. They camped that night beneath a stand of lodgepole pines where the wind threaded through the branches in low sighs. Harlan built the fire close to the wagon, and when it burned down to embers, he climbed inside after her, careful not to jostle the beams. She lay already beneath the quilts, eyes open. You still talk in your sleep? Only when I'm restless. Then I hope you stay restless, she said, and reached for his hand beneath the covers. The heat of her fingers found his palm, and he stilled. Violet, he said, voice rough from the day's dust. What kind of life do you see ahead? She spoke into the dark, one with a garden, maybe chickens. A stove that doesn't smoke. I want to hang laundry across a line and know it'll dry before supper. You ever think about having children? She turned her head toward him. I used to. Then the doctor told me after the fever I might not be able to carry. He waited, listening to the wind outside. But I still want the chance, she added. Not because I think it'll make me whole. Just because I want to see what we could make together. He drew her hand fully into his, tucking it close against his chest. If it's you and me, that's all I'd ever need. But if there's more, I'll build cradles and fence posts with the same hands. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. You always speak like you mean it. I do. The next morning, they passed a group of Nez Perce riders moving east, wrapped in robes of woven wool with feathers tucked behind their ears. One of the older men raised a hand in acknowledgement. Harlan tipped his hat. Violet lifted her fingers in quiet greeting. After they passed, she said, when I was 16, I ran off with a friend of mine to see the Wallowa Valley. We stayed with a family who gave us bread baked in hot stones. They told us stories about rivers that fought back. Harlan raised an eyebrow. You run off often? Once, she said, but I came back changed. He looked ahead at the range, lifting slow and blue in the distance. You think you'll stay once we stop? I think I've done all the running I need, she said. And I'd like to plant roots before it's too late in the season. That night, they camped near a stream that ran clear and shallow over flat stones. Violet waited in near dusk, skirt hitched high, her laughter light but not careless. Harlan watched her from the bank, arms crossed, a warmth blooming behind his ribs that had nothing to do with the fire. When she stepped out, she reached for a towel and glanced at him. You going to stand there looking like a man who forgot how to breathe? He chuckled low. I'm just trying to remember how to deserve this. You already do, she said. You just have to believe it. She curled up beside him that night, damp hair brushing his throat, and for the first time in years, Harlan felt the weight of silence lift. Not because their journey was over, but because the ache of something unfinished had finally quieted. They were nearing the edge of Oregon now. The road would change soon, and so would the days. But beside him, Violet slept steady, hand in his, and he knew whatever came next, they would build it together. They crossed into Oregon as the first green shoots curled up from the thawed earth, fine as thread and bright against the dark soil. The road widened and leveled, the blue mountains softening behind them. The mule's pace eased in the warmer air, and Violet no longer needed the shawl in the mornings. The day they reached the edge of a farming valley near Union, they passed a man repairing a fence line with a boy, both of them waving as the wagon rolled by. Harlan tipped his hat, then glanced sideways at Violet. There's a place I heard of just west of here, he said. A widow runs it with her son sells parcels of land to veterans. She's got a hand mill and a good well. Violet rested her hand on the wagon frame, fingers spread against the smooth wood. How many acres? Enough to grow food and keep a few animals. Enough to matter. She watched the distant fields, where goats picked their way among the rocks. Does it have trees? Cottonwoods. One barn, a 2-room cabin. Needs work. She nodded once. Let's see it. They arrived by late afternoon. The widow, a woman in her 50s with sleeves rolled to her elbows and a child's shoe tucked in her apron pocket, led them past the barn and showed them the land. The grass was patchy but coming back strong. A creek cut through the southern edge, and the soil near the bank darkened with promise. Violet knelt at the water's edge, dipped her hand into the current, then looked back at Harlan. I want this, she said. He spoke to the widow while Violet walked the line of the fence, her hand brushing the new buds on the wild rose bushes tangled at the base. That evening, they signed the papers by lamplight at the woman's kitchen table. The mules slept in the barn, the wagon finally still. They moved into the cabin the next morning. It smelled of cedar and ash, and the floor creaked in 2 places. Harlan built a bedstead from pine boards and dragged the old sheepskins inside. Violet opened the shutters and let the light in. The first days blurred with work. Harlan repaired the porch rail and cleared brush from the south field. Violet swept out the cabin, patched the leaking roof, and set stones around the hearth. Neither of them spoke much during the labor, but there was a kind of grace in it, a rhythm that folded them into the land. One night, after supper, she sat at the edge of the bed, brushing out her hair. Harlan watched the firelight catch in the strands, and he said, You ever think about what you'd name a place like this? She paused, then said, Ashrut. He tilted his head. Why? Because it starts from what burned, she said, but it grows anyway. He stepped behind her, took the brush gently from her hand, and finished smoothing her hair in long, slow strokes. I'd like to build you a porch swing, he said. Something solid. You could sit there and watch the changes come. She smiled faintly. Only if you promise to sit with me. He bent close. Always. That spring, they planted onions and parsnips, peas along the fence line, and a row of wildflowers Violet carried in a small linen pouch from her childhood. The mule stayed on to help with plowing, and neighbors came by with cuttings and seed, saying little but offering much. As summer crept in, the land bloomed. Violet's cheeks took on color again, and she moved through the cabin with easy strength. Harlan built a chicken coop, and Violet carved their initials into the lintel above the door, 1 letter at a time. One evening, as twilight settled soft across the fields, they sat on the porch step, the swing not yet finished but promised. I never thought this would be mine, she said softly, watching the sky turn lavender. A home. A man who stays. He reached for her hand, calloused and warm from work. You were always going to have it, Violet. It just took time to find our way. She leaned into him, her voice quiet. You think we'll be happy? I think we already are. She turned then, her face inches from his. Then I'm ready. For what? He asked. To wear the ring. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the box she'd carried since the mountains, and opened it without a word. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger, her hand steady now, her breath even. They didn't speak again that night, but as the moon rose over their field, they lay together in the cabin's stillness, no longer reaching for what was gone, but holding what had finally come. Years passed, and the land shaped itself around them. They added a room to the cabin and planted apple trees near the creek. Harlan taught a neighbor boy how to raise fence posts, and Violet stitched quilts for the women who came through in wagons. Every Sunday, they sat side by side on the porch swing he'd built with salvaged timber, watching the wind roll across their field. They never left that place, not because they couldn't, but because they'd come far enough. And in the soft hush of a life well earned, they found something better than the future they once imagined. They found peace. Together. Always.